The smell of burnt sugar drifted through the loading bay of the small transport, mixing with the cold metallic air of the docking moon. A single passenger sat near the cargo door, peeling a strange purple fruit with a folding knife. He worked slowly, with the calm patience of someone who had peeled 1,000 stranger things in his life. His name was Daniel, and he was the only human on the ship. The pilot, a tired, insect-like creature with 4 eyes, kept glancing back at him through the cabin mirror. Every time the human moved, the pilot flinched a little. Daniel did not seem to notice. He just hummed an old tune from his grandmother's village and split the fruit cleanly in half. Outside the window, the research moon of Hadrelis grew larger. It was a gray rock covered in glowing greenhouses. Each dome held plants that had killed more researchers than any war in galactic history. The famous academy sat in the middle of the moon, a tall white building with thick black vines climbing its outer walls. Those vines, Daniel knew, were not decoration. They were a security system. One scratch from a mature thorn would stop the heart of any creature in less than a breath. The transport landed softly on the wet stone pad. Steam hissed from the engines and curled around Daniel's boots as he stepped out. He carried only 3 things: a small canvas bag over one shoulder, a battered metal tin tied to his belt, and a folded paper note tucked into his shirt pocket. The tin clinked gently as he walked. Inside it were salt, 3 dried herbs, crushed black pepper, and a few seeds his grandmother had packed for him before he left Earth. A tall figure was waiting for him at the edge of the platform. The figure had smooth gray scales, a long thin tail, and golden eyes that did not blink often. He wore a dark green robe with a silver clasp shaped like a leaf. This was Professor Alvin, the head of the lethal flora department. He had been studying poisonous plants for almost 300 years. Daniel had read every paper Alvin had ever published during the long flight to this moon. The professor lowered his head slightly in greeting. He did not offer his hand. His species did not enjoy touch, and he had also been told humans were fragile. He looked Daniel up and down once, the way a cook might look at a small fish that he was not sure was worth cleaning. "Welcome to Hadrelis," Alvin said. His voice was dry and careful. "I am Professor Alvin. I will be your supervisor during your stay. I hope for your sake it is a short one." Daniel smiled and gave a small nod. "Thank you, sir. I am happy to be here." The professor did not return the smile. He turned and began walking toward the academy. Daniel followed, his boots tapping softly on the wet stone. They passed under the black vines, and Alvin watched the human carefully to see if he would tense up or duck. Daniel did neither. He just looked up at the vines with curious eyes, the way a child might look at a tall tree. Inside, the orientation hall was long and quiet. Tall glass tubes lined both walls. In each tube floated a different plant. Some had thick red leaves that pulsed slowly, as if breathing. Some had pale white flowers that glowed in the dark. Some looked like nothing more than dry sticks, but small warning signs underneath them showed how many lives they had taken. Alvin walked slowly down the hall, nomming a few specimens, expecting the human to grow pale or sweat or beg to leave. Daniel did not. Instead, he stopped in front of one of the tubes and leaned close to the glass. Inside floated a curled black root, twisted like a sleeping snake. He breathed in through his nose, even though the tube was sealed and no smell could escape. "This one smells like something my grandmother used to roast," he said softly. "We called it midnight ginger. She would slice it thin and dry it on the roof for 2 days before cooking." Alvin stopped walking. He turned slowly. The plant in that tube was called the black choke root. Its smoke could kill an unprotected lung in 12 seconds. It was one of the deadliest known specimens in the galaxy. There was no possible way a human grandmother had ever cooked it on a roof. "You are mistaken," the professor said carefully. "That plant does not grow on your world." Daniel only shrugged. "Maybe it has a cousin there. They look very alike." Before Alvin could answer, a small group of students gathered at the end of the hall. Word had spread that the human had arrived. A young feathered student with bright blue and silver plumage stepped forward first. Her name was Serena. She bowed politely and offered Daniel a folded leaf as a welcome gift. Behind her, a heavy four-armed student named Brusque laughed loudly and folded all four arms across his wide chest. 20 credits says he is in the medical wing by Friday, Brusque said. Daniel turned and looked at Brusque for a long moment. He did not look angry. He looked the way a calm cook looks at a loud customer. Then he smiled. "I will not be in the medical wing," Daniel said. "But if anyone here can show me to the kitchen, I would be very grateful. I have had ship food for 2 weeks." The students went silent. Alvin cleared his throat. "Tomorrow," the professor said, "your first lab will involve the crimson veil. Its pollen kills in under 1 minute. I suggest you sleep well, human." Daniel touched the tin on his belt and nodded once. "I will sleep very well, sir," he said. "Thank you." A wooden spoon tapped softly against the rim of a small clay bowl. The sound echoed through the empty academy kitchen, where Daniel had been awake since long before the moon's pale sunrise. He had found the kitchen on his own the night before, and he had asked no one for permission. A pot of something simmered slowly on a low flame in front of him. The smell was warm and sweet, and a little smoky, the kind of smell that does not belong on a research moon full of poisons. A small cleaning droid rolled past the open door and stopped, confused. It scanned the air, beeped twice, and quickly rolled away to report this strange new event to its supervisor. Daniel did not look up. He stirred the pot once, tasted from the spoon, and gave a small, satisfied nod. Then he wiped his hands on his apron, picked up his canvas bag, and walked toward the lab hall. The lab was already crowded when he arrived. Every student stood inside a thick protective suit. Heavy gloves covered their hands. Wide helmets covered their faces. A breathing tube ran from each helmet down to a tank on their backs. The room hummed with the sound of air filters. In the center of the lab, on a raised stone table, sat a single plant in a sealed glass dome. Its leaves were a deep red, almost black at the edges. Soft pink dust floated inside the dome, slowly settling on the leaves and rising again with each tiny movement of air. This was the crimson veil. Professor Alvin stood near the table with his arms folded behind his back. When he saw Daniel walk in wearing only an apron and his old jacket, his tail twitched sharply against the floor. "Human," Alvin said, his voice rising for the first time. "Where is your protective suit? This is not a joke. The pollen of this plant has killed full-grown beings 4 times your size." Daniel walked calmly to the table. He set his canvas bag on a small stool, opened it, and pulled out a clean pan, a folding knife, and a small wooden cutting board. The students whispered to each other. Serena, in her suit, stepped forward as if to stop him. Brusque, also in a suit, leaned in to watch with all 4 arms ready. "Sir," Daniel said, looking up at the professor with calm eyes, "the crimson veil only releases its pollen when the stem is bruised or twisted. If I cut the leaf cleanly at the joint, no pollen will move. I read this in a paper last year. I think the writer was your student." Alvin went very still. That detail was new. It had been discovered only 10 months ago by one of his junior researchers. The paper had not even been added to the main textbook yet. There was no way a human exchange student should have known this. Alvin had assumed Daniel had only read the older, simpler books. "Read or not," Alvin said carefully, "no one has ever cut this plant by hand without a suit. The risk is too high." Daniel nodded as if he understood. Then very gently, he reached into the small access glove built into the side of the dome. His bare hand, covered only by a thin sealed sleeve, slid inside. He did not look afraid. He did not even look careful. He looked the way a man looks when he is reaching into his own kitchen drawer. The room held its breath. Even the air filters seemed to grow quieter. Daniel found the joint of the lowest leaf with his fingertips. He felt along the small bump where the leaf met the stem. Then, with a single smooth motion, he made a clean cut. The leaf came away. Not a single grain of pink pollen lifted into the air. The dust on the rest of the plant did not even shift. He pulled the leaf out through the small sealed slot, placed it on his wooden board, and closed the dome again. The room let out a long shared breath. Brusque's wide jaw, all four parts of it, slowly dropped open. Daniel lit the small portable burner he had brought, set the pan on top, and waited for the heat. He sliced the red leaf into thin strips, added a little oil from a small bottle, and dropped the strips into the hot pan. They hissed softly. A new smell filled the room. It was rich and earthy, almost like roasted meat mixed with sweet pepper. The smell was so unexpected that several students lifted their helmets a little, then quickly closed them again. Daniel reached to his belt, opened his battered tin, and sprinkled salt and a small pinch of dried herbs over the cooking strips. He stirred them with his folding knife. After a minute, he lifted one strip, blew on it gently, and put it in his mouth. He chewed slowly. He thought for a moment, then he swallowed and smiled. "It needs a little more salt," he said, "but it is good. The bitterness is gone after the heat. On Earth, my grandmother said heat is the best peeler of poison." No one spoke. Professor Alvin stared at him with eyes so wide they did not blink. The dean, watching from a side window, had her hand pressed against the glass. Brusque finally found his voice. "He just ate the crimson veil," he whispered. "He just ate the crimson veil and said it needed salt." Serena lifted her helmet slowly. Her feathers were puffed in shock and wonder. Daniel offered the pan toward the class with a kind, simple smile. "Anyone want to try? It is better when shared." Alvin turned without a word and walked straight out of the lab. He needed to speak with the dean. The human, he was beginning to understand, was not going home on Friday. 3 small fish made of green light swam in slow circles inside a glass tank that sat on the dean's wide desk. They were not real fish. They were a calming display, designed to lower stress in important meetings. Right now, the dean needed them more than ever. She was an older amphibian named Halira, with soft blue skin and large patient eyes. Her long fingers tapped slowly on the desk as she listened to Professor Alvin explain, for the third time, what had happened in the lab that morning. Daniel sat across from her in a simple chair. His apron was folded neatly on his lap. The smell of cooked crimson veil still clung faintly to his sleeves. Halira finally raised one webbed hand to stop the professor. She turned her wide eyes toward Daniel. "Young man," she said, her voice slow and gentle, "you understand that what you did today should be impossible. Many great minds have studied that plant. None of them ever ate it and lived. None of them even tried." Daniel nodded politely. "I understand, Dean, but I think they were afraid of the wrong part. The pollen is the real danger. The leaf, once heated, is just food." Halira looked at him for a long moment. Then she made a quiet sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sigh. "I am going to give you a chance," she said. "For 1 week you will face our most difficult specimens, not in a kitchen, in a real lab with real risks. If you survive and if you teach us something each day, then we will study your methods with full respect. If you fail, you will be sent home quietly. Do you accept?" "I accept," Daniel said without thinking twice. The next morning, the academy gathered for the first test. The specimen was the whisper vine, a thick green rope of a plant that lived deep in swamp moons. Its surface was coated in a thin, clear acid. A single touch could burn through bone in minutes. Many researchers had lost hands trying to study it. The vine was placed on a long table in the center of the lab. A circle of students watched from a safe distance. Daniel walked up to the vine slowly. He did not wear gloves. Instead, he carried a small bundle of dry straw and a wide, flat board. He studied the vine for a few minutes, tilting his head. He was looking for something. The vine had thin lines running along its surface, like the grain in a piece of wood. Most people would not have noticed. Daniel did. He lifted a piece of straw and lightly stroked the vine along its grain from one end to the other. The straw did not burn. He smiled. Then he placed the wide board next to the vine, and using only the straw and his bare fingertips, he began to roll the vine onto the board, always moving with the grain. The acid had no chance to react. After 10 careful minutes, the vine lay coiled on the board, harmless as a sleeping snake. "Against the grain it bites," Daniel said. "With the grain it lets you pass. Like cutting an onion, you have to know which way the layers run." The students stared. Alvin wrote in his notebook so fast his pen tore the paper. The second day brought the soft lung flower, a beautiful pale blue blossom whose nectar paralyzed the breathing of any creature that drank it. Daniel collected the nectar using a wooden spoon, poured it into a clay jar, and added a pinch of yeast from his tin. He sealed the jar and left it overnight in a warm corner. The next morning, the nectar had turned into a thick, sweet golden syrup. He poured a drop onto his tongue. It tasted, he said, like honey mixed with flowers. The fermentation had broken down the dangerous chemical completely. 3 faculty members rushed to take notes. The third day was the burst fruit. It was a small black fruit that exploded with sharp shards when bitten. Many had lost teeth and some had lost more. Daniel did not bite it. He held the fruit up to the light and turned it slowly, looking for a thin pale line that ran along one side. The line was almost invisible. He took a wooden skewer and pressed it gently along that line. The fruit split open neatly, like a clam. Inside was soft yellow flesh that smelled of butter and lemon. "Every fruit has a seam," Daniel said. "You only have to find it before it finds you." By the 4th day, Serena was no longer just watching. She was Daniel's shadow. She carried his bag, took his notes, and asked him 100 questions. Brusque, the 4-armed student who had laughed on day 1, came to Daniel's small room that evening with a sheepish look. He had secretly tasted some of the cooked vine from the lab. He admitted it was the best meal he had eaten in years. He asked, very quietly, if Daniel could teach him too. Daniel smiled and pulled out a second apron from his bag. In the faculty meeting that night, the professors argued for hours. Some were thrilled, some were afraid. Alvin finally stood up. His golden eyes were tired, but they were also bright. "For 300 years, he said, "we have studied these plants from behind glass. We have feared them. We have lost good minds to them. This human does not fear them. He listens to them. Maybe his species has something we have lost or never had." Halira nodded slowly. Then she made her decision. "Tomorrow," she said, "the human will face the silent bloom." The room went cold. Even Alvin, who had been ready for anything, lowered his gaze. The bell tower of the academy rang 7 times before dawn. It had not rung that early in over 40 years. The last time was during a containment failure, when a single seed of the silent bloom had escaped its case and ended the lives of 3 senior researchers in less than a minute. The bell now rang to gather every student, every professor, and every visiting scholar to the central amphitheater. They came quickly, wrapped in their morning robes, their faces still half asleep. None of them spoke as they climbed the stone steps to their seats. In the center of the amphitheater stood a tall, sealed glass chamber. Triple containment locks lined its edges. Inside the chamber, on a small black pedestal, sat a single pale flower no bigger than a child's hand. Its petals were the color of bone. It did not move. It did not sway. It only sat there, perfect and silent, the way a knife sits before it is used. This was the silent bloom. Daniel walked into the chamber alone. He carried only his apron, his folding knife, his battered tin, and one thing the academy had never seen him bring before: a small clay pot of plain water. The crowd murmured. They had expected him to bring some clever tool, some special gloves, some ancient human secret. He brought water. Alvin stood at the front row of the observation deck. His tail was curled tightly around his ankles. His golden eyes were fixed on the human as the inner doors sealed shut with a heavy hiss. The seal turned green. There was no going back now. Daniel placed the clay pot on the pedestal next to the flower. Then he stepped back 2 paces and folded his hands in front of him. He did not touch the bloom. He did not even look at it directly. He looked at the floor of the chamber, the way one might look at a sleeping animal, careful not to wake it too suddenly. A long minute passed. The crowd grew restless. Brusque, sitting near the front, leaned toward Serena. "What is he doing?" he whispered. Why is he just standing there? Serena did not answer. Her sharp eyes were locked on the flower. She had learned in the last week that Daniel never did anything without a reason. She trusted that more than she trusted her own training. Inside the chamber, something began to change. The pale petals of the silent bloom shifted just slightly. Then they shifted again. Slowly, very slowly, the flower began to lean toward the clay pot. Its stem bent like a tired neck reaching for a pillow. The flower seemed almost gentle now, almost desperate. Its petals dipped down toward the surface of the water. Then it began to drink. A soft, almost invisible mist rose from the surface of the water and was pulled into the petals. With each second, the bloom changed. The bone-white color faded. A soft green crept in at the edges. The petals, once stiff and pale, began to look soft and alive. After 2 full minutes, the flower was no longer a silent bloom. It was just a small green flower, sitting calmly in the morning light. Daniel stepped forward. He did not put on a glove. He did not hold his breath. He simply reached out with 2 fingers and gently plucked a single petal from the bloom. The flower did not react. He placed the petal on his tongue, closed his mouth, and chewed once. He smiled. Then he leaned toward the chamber's speaker. His voice came through the amphitheater clearly. "The toxin is a defense against thirst," he said. "When this plant is dry, it builds poison to protect itself. When it has water, it has nothing to fear, so it has no reason to fight. A hydrated bloom is not a weapon. It is just a flower." He paused, then added with a quiet smile, "It tastes a little like jasmine. My grandmother grew jasmine on her balcony." The amphitheater erupted. Some students cheered. Some scholars stood up so fast they knocked over their water cups. A few elders simply sat in their seats with their mouths open, unable to make any sound at all. One old researcher began to cry, very quietly, into the sleeve of his robe. He had been the supervisor of the team that died 40 years ago. He had spent his whole life trying to understand what had killed his friends. The answer, it turned out, was thirst. Alvin did not cheer. He did not stand. He simply lowered himself slowly into his seat and put one clawed hand over his eyes. 300 years of his work had just been rewritten in 3 minutes by a young man with a clay pot. The chamber unsealed. Daniel stepped out, carrying the small green flower in his palm like a sleeping baby bird. He walked up the stone steps and placed it gently in front of Dean Halira. The dean stared at it. Then she stared at Daniel. Her wide eyes were full of tears, the calm kind, the kind that come after a long fear has finally lifted. "How did you know?" she whispered. Daniel shrugged softly. "On Earth, my grandmother told me that a thirsty plant is an angry plant. She said you should always water your garden before you ask it for fruit. I thought maybe the same was true of this one." The dean reached out and gently touched the green petals. "Tonight," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "we will speak about what comes next. The galaxy is going to want to know about this. Some of them will not be happy." Daniel nodded. He had already guessed that part. The bell tower somewhere far above began to ring again. This time it sounded different, lighter, almost like a song. A heavy black ship landed at the Academy docks 2 days later, much larger than any normal transport. Its hull was painted with the silver crests of 7 ancient civilizations. Its engines cooled with a low, growling sound that made the cleaning droids hide in the corners. From its main ramp came a slow line of tall, robed figures, walking in pairs. They were the Council of Galactic Botany, scholars older than most kingdoms, who had ruled the study of dangerous plants for thousands of years. None of them looked happy. Inside the academy, Daniel was peeling a small purple root in the kitchen. Serena sat across from him, taking notes in a careful hand. Brusque was kneading dough nearby, his 4 arms working in a steady rhythm. The smell of fresh bread filled the room. Then a junior droid rolled in and beeped twice. The council had asked to see the human, right now. Daniel washed his hands, dried them on his apron, and walked calmly to the great hearing hall. Serena and Brusque followed without being told. The hearing hall was a wide circle of stone with tall windows. The 7 council members sat in a half-ring of dark wooden chairs. Dean Halira sat to one side. Professor Alvin stood near the center, his tail twitching nervously. The eldest council member, a thin, gray-skinned scholar with silver eyes, lifted one wrinkled hand. "Human," she said. Her voice was as old as cracked stone. "We have read the reports. We have watched the recordings. We do not believe them." Daniel bowed his head politely. "I understand." "Do you?" said another council member, a sharp-faced creature with long ears. "For 3,000 years our greatest minds have studied these plants. Some of our species died trying to do what you did in a single week. Now you stand here, a child of a young world, claiming to have solved problems we could not. Either the Academy is lying or you are hiding something. Perhaps a tool. Perhaps a hidden device. Show us what you carry." Daniel did not argue. He stepped forward and placed his small canvas bag on the council's wooden table. Then he untied the battered tin from his belt and placed it next to the bag. He pulled out his folding knife, his small clay pot, and finally the folded paper note from his shirt pocket. He laid each item out, one by one, like a cook setting up a stall in a market. "This is everything I have," he said quietly. The council members leaned forward. The eldest opened the tin. Inside she found salt, 3 small bundles of dried herbs, a little crushed black pepper, 4 small dry seeds, and the folded note. She unfolded the note carefully. The writing was shaky and small, made by an old hand. She turned it over, studying both sides as if expecting hidden circuits. "What is this?" she asked. "A note from my grandmother," Daniel said. "She wrote it the night before I left Earth. She could not see well anymore, so her writing is not neat." The council member with long ears made a sharp sound. "And what does it say?" Daniel took a slow breath. He did not need to read it. He had read it 100 times during the long flight. "It says, every plant has a story, you just have to listen long enough to hear it. It also says, do not forget to eat something warm at least once a day." The room was very quiet. Even the council seemed unsure how to speak next. The eldest scholar set the note down gently. "You expect us to believe that a piece of paper and a tin of salt are the source of your success?" Daniel shook his head. "No, the source is older than the tin. My people did not become cooks because we were clever. We became cooks because we were hungry. For thousands of years, on a small world full of plants that could kill us, we had to learn. The ones who guessed wrong did not have children. The ones who guessed right wrote down what worked. Then they taught their children. Then their children taught their children. Every recipe on Earth is a survival note from someone who lived long enough to share it. I am only standing on top of all of them." He looked at the council with calm, steady eyes. "I am not hiding anything. I am not special. The knowledge is not mine. It belongs to every grandmother who ever wrote down what to do with a strange root. If you want it, I will share it, all of it, freely." The council members looked at one another. No one spoke. The sharp-faced one with long ears finally lowered his head, almost in shame. The eldest scholar slowly closed the tin. Serena, standing at the back of the hall, suddenly stepped forward. Her bright feathers caught the window light. "I want to be his student," she said clearly. "Officially, I will leave my old program." Brusque stepped up beside her. He cleared his throat with all 4 arms folded. "So do I," he said. "If a human grandmother can teach me to make food from poison, I want to learn." Behind them, more students began to stand. Then a few junior researchers. Then, slowly, an entire row. Dean Halira rose from her seat. Her wide eyes shone. "Council members," she said, "I propose a new department, Applied Survival Botany, to be co-led by Professor Alvin and our human guest. We will teach not only how to study these plants, but how to live with them." The eldest scholar looked at the small note on the table for a long, long moment. Then she nodded once. "Approved," she said quietly. Daniel picked up his grandmother's note and tucked it back into his pocket. He smiled. Somewhere far away, he thought, a small kitchen on Earth had just changed the galaxy. 6 months had passed, and the smell of the academy had changed. It used to smell of cold steel and chemical cleaner, and the faint sour bite of safety chemicals. Now, in the morning, it smelled of fresh bread, roasted herbs, and warm spice. The cleaning droids still rolled through the halls, but they had been reprogrammed to avoid the small kitchens that had been built into every research wing. The kitchens were the new heart of the academy. Each one had a soft cooking fire, a long wooden table, and racks of dried plants that were once locked behind triple containment. In the eastern garden, Serena was leading a class of younger students. She held up a piece of whisper vine, fully prepared and harmless, and showed them how to follow its grain with their fingertips. Her bright feathers were dusted with flour because she had been baking earlier that morning. Some of the students laughed when she noticed and tried to brush it off her wings. She laughed with them. The old, fearful silence of the academy was gone. In the western wing, Brusque stood in front of a large stone oven. All 4 of his thick arms were covered in dough up to the elbows. He had become, of all things, the academy's master baker. He used flour ground from the seeds of the burst fruit, mixed with water from softened soft-lung flowers. His bread was golden, soft, and so loved that students lined up outside his kitchen every morning. He had even started a small notebook of his own recipes, written in his thick handwriting. He always signed each page with the words, "Taught to me by the one with 2 arms." Professor Alvin now wore a small white apron over his dark green robes. The other professors had teased him about it for the first few weeks. They did not tease him anymore. His new lectures were the most attended in the academy. He spoke not only of chemistry and danger, but of patience and listening. He often paused mid-lesson to taste something a student had brought him, and he would close his golden eyes and nod slowly, the way a man nods when he understands something he should have known long ago. In the central courtyard, an old stone arch stood above the main hall. For nearly 400 years, that arch had carried the academy's old motto, carved deep into the stone. It read, "Fear what grows in silence." Today, 2 stonecutters stood on a tall ladder, gently scraping away the old letters. A small crowd had gathered to watch. Daniel stood at the back, his hands tucked into the pockets of his apron. He did not look proud. He looked thoughtful, the way a cook looks when he is deciding if a soup needs one more pinch of salt. Dean Halira walked up beside him. Her soft blue skin had gained a healthy shine in the last 6 months. She, too, wore a small apron now. "Are you sure about the new words?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded. "I am sure." The stonecutters began carving the new line. It took the rest of the afternoon. By the time the sun set behind the gray hills of Hadreles, the new motto was finished. The crowd read it together slowly, in many languages. It read, "What kills you is only a question of who is holding the knife." That evening, the entire academy gathered for a shared meal in the great garden. Long wooden tables had been set up under the wide branches of the night-blooming trees. On those tables sat dishes from a dozen species, all made from plants that, only a year before, would have killed every being present. There was bread from Brusque's oven. There was syrup from the soft lung flour drizzled over fruit from the burst tree. There was tea brewed from the petals of a once silent bloom, soft green and gently sweet. The garden glowed with small lanterns, and laughter floated between the tables like a warm wind. Daniel sat at the edge of the garden on a low stone bench, holding a cup of the silent bloom tea. He watched the students of many species eat together, share jokes, and pass plates back and forth without fear. A young scholar from a distant moon was carefully showing an even younger student how to peel a fruit with a wooden skewer. The lesson was being passed on. That was all that mattered. Alvin walked over and sat down beside him. His tail curled neatly under the bench. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the garden together. "Daniel," the professor said at last. His voice was softer now than it used to be. "Your people, this thing you do, this strange friendship with what should be your enemy, what do you call it?" Daniel thought for a moment. He looked down into his cup. The pale green tea swirled gently. He thought of his grandmother and of her small balcony garden, and of the way she used to hum while she cooked, even on hard days. "We call it cooking," he said simply, "but I think really it is just listening. You listen to the plant. You listen to the people who came before you. You listen to your own hunger, and then you make something warm out of all of it." Alvin was quiet for a long time. Then he gave the smallest, slowest nod that Daniel had ever seen him make. Daniel reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the folded paper note. The edges were softer now from being touched so many times. He unfolded it gently and read the last line one more time, the line he had not shared with the council. "When you finish your journey," his grandmother had written, "find someone hungry and feed them." Daniel folded the note. He stood up. He went to find the next plate.